Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected.
Good evening, and welcome to another edition of What Do You Think? My name is Bill Morse. I'm the host of the show. Normally, this is a call-in program, but because I'm going to be out of town tomorrow, this is pre-recorded. So you are seeing this on Thursday, February 3rd, 2022. Now, when we were looking at the pictures for the intro, especially the sunnier ones that followed the snow, I was wondering how many people are tired of white stuff. Carla went down to Philadelphia as kind of a break from the snow and the ice, because she doesn't get around too well in snow and ice. And what happens? Saturday, they received 8 inches of snow in Philadelphia. So she sent me a picture of her backyard, back of the row house, and it indeed has 8 inches of snow covering everything. So I need to go down and pick her up, bring her back to Bellows Falls so she can have less snow. It's the irony, especially with what's going on with the weather the last couple of years. It's unpredictable. So, I have a list of names I'm going to read through quickly. And the trick here is to make a connection between all these people. What one experience do all these people, and there's maybe 15 of them, and I think you'll recognize at least half of the names. There's one thing that ties them all together, and I'm going to reveal what that one thing or one experience is that ties them together after I go through the list. First person on the list is Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada. Boris Johnson, the former mayor of London, who is now the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Angela Merkel, who is the former Chancellor of Germany. Nicolas Sarkozy, former President of France. Emmanuel Macron, who is the current President of France. Tony Blair, a past PM or Prime Minister of Great Britain. Jacinda Ardern, who is currently the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Bill Gates, who I'm sure many of you have heard of. Jeff Bezos, who was recently launched into space, the head of Amazon. Former head of Amazon, I believe he's resigned. Sebastian Kurz, who is the former Prime Minister of Austria. I think he had to leave because of some scandal. Viktor Orban, who is the Prime Minister of Hungary. Jean-Claude Juncker, who I believe is an economist connected with the European Union. Annalena Baerbock, who is the head of the Green Party in Germany and is now foreign minister. Annalena Baerbock met recently with President Joe Biden to discuss the situation in the Ukraine and sanctions against Russia and further measures to prevent Russia from moving across the border into its neighbor, the Ukraine. Vladimir Putin, on the other side of the fence. Gavin Newsom, the former mayor of San Francisco around 2010, and the second term governor of the Republic of California. Now, my question initially was, what ties all these people together other than the fact that they hold, except for 3 or 4 of them, 2 or 3 of them, they all hold elected positions. They were elected in office. They have leadership positions, except for Jean-Claude Juncker. Annalena Baerbock was assigned foreign minister by, the new chancellor, Olaf, I believe his name is. Okay. Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates are not elected officials, but they are very influential in their respective areas. So what ties them together? They are all graduates of the Global Leadership School run by the World Economic Forum. If you caught last week's episode or edition, we discussed the World Economic Forum as a group, kind of a think tank group that meets yearly in Davos, Switzerland, which is not far from Geneva. And they put their minds together and they basically endorse a doctrine that is spelled out in a rather long-winded way over 240 pages through this book called the COVID-19, The Great Reset. This book is available on Amazon. Thank you, Jeff Bezos. And it is written by Klaus Schwab, who is an economist, an engineer, and in the early 70s, he started putting together this group of people, and the idea being to discuss and further disseminate his version of what capitalism in the new millennia should look like. All of these people have been through his program of global world leadership. Some were in this program in the 90s, some in the early 2000s. The program still exists, and through a rigorous selection process, you too have a chance to be among the alumni of this group that went through the Young World Leader program. I forgot to mention Chelsea Clinton. Chelsea Clinton has also gone through this program run by Klaus Schwab. So that's quite a list of people. As we stated last week, the whole premise of this view of what the world should look like is a transition from what Klaus Schwab calls a shareholder capitalism, whereby a company works for profits and the profits solely benefit the shareholders or people who own parts of the company. Stocks, for example, shares in the company, to a stakeholder type of capitalism whereby the company has not just an incentive or a mission of profitability, but also one of social responsibility, being responsible for the long-term effects of its product, benefits to mankind, benefits to at least a neutral carbon footprint or impact on the environment. And so these are the goals this is the narrative that is put forward by Klaus Schwab through this school of young global leaders, so many of which have gone through and have made headlines and have had an impact in various areas of the world, be them politics, be them be that politics, be that economics, be that social issues, etc. So what I wanted to do was finish off with this book, read 2 short sections, and then pick up on last year's 2021 and this year's, which was January of 2022, World Economic Forums in Davos. Both events were Zoom events, but a number of interesting people showed up and had something to say. Of course, following the same narrative established by Klaus Schwab of an enlightened form of capitalism. So one of the things, when I was reading this, a couple of things I was curious. One of them was, would they discuss, when they're talking about COVID-19, the origins of the virus? If you go through YouTube, you can find voices all over the place as to where, explanations as to how COVID-19 originated. And I'm going to read just a couple of paragraphs, the explanation here on where COVID-19 came from. And it's interesting because it touches a couple of other facets in the narrative. In a recent letter to the U.S. Congress, 100 wildlife and environmental groups estimate that zoonotic diseases, in other words, diseases that are brought to man through animals are the hosts of the diseases. I'm not sure if the bubonic plague, which came on fleas, infected fleas that were in the fur of rats on ships, if the bubonic plague would be an example of a zoonotic disease, but I guess it would be. We talked about the bubonic plague a couple of weeks ago and how some local hospital that dealt with the virus turned the disease into a business model in Geneva. Interesting story. If you go on YouTube, you can pick that up. The Chronicle of Geneva, 1530, I believe, by a French-speaking Swiss abbey in Geneva. But anyway, that's another story. Since, let's see, 100 wildlife and environmental groups estimate that zoonotic diseases, that is, transmitted through animals, have quadrupled over the past 50 years. Since 1970, land use changes have had the largest relative negative impact on nature, and in the process caused a quarter of man-made emissions. In other words, more land is being used for farming. Now, that certainly is the case in countries like Brazil, where they have destroyed rainforest areas for cattle raising and crop raising. That's certainly the case, and that has had a negative effect on the biodiversity, or the plant life and animal life that found these formerly undeveloped areas. They called them their habitat. But then I got to thinking, if you look at Vermont, we actually have far less agricultural land than we did in the 1700s, or even the 1800s. If you look at old photographs, you'll see vast fields where now there are forests. The forests we see, many of them are not old growth, they're new growth, meaning that they were cleared at one time for grazing mostly, and also growing crops, although not so much because of the rocky soil, the poor nature of the soil. So I question that in a way, because I'd like to see actually a square mileage globally that has been destroyed, that was virgin wildlife area, virgin forests or wetlands 100 years ago. So that's just a small question. Agriculture alone covers more than 1/3 of the Earth's surface. I'm not sure about that. A lot of the earth is covered by desert. So anyway, land surface, that is. And is the economic activity that disrupts nature the most. Agriculture disrupts nature the most. Well, in the sense that it removes the habitat of animals and plants, yes, that's true. A recent, but so do shopping malls and parking lots. So, but we're talking agriculture uses, of course, much more land. And is the economic activity that disrupts nature the most. A recent academic review concludes that the agriculture drivers, in other words, the proponents of agriculture, farming, are associated with more than 50% of animal-transmitted diseases. Now, this is going somewhere. Hold on. As human activities like agriculture, farming, with many others like mining, logging, or tourism encroach on natural ecosystems, the environment, they break down the barriers between human populations and animals, creating the conditions for infectious diseases, contagious diseases to emerge by spilling from animals to humans. Now, again, that makes me pause because we have always, especially more in the past than now, been in close contact with nature, with animals. Actually, with the lack of predators, we're seeing more contact with animals, such as wildcats or wolves or bears, now more than before. But this is going somewhere, so just hold on. The loss of animals' natural habitat and the wildlife trade are particularly relevant because when animals known as being linked to particular diseases, like bats with coronavirus, are taken out of the wild and moved into cities, a wildlife disease reservoir is simply transported into a densely populated area. Now, I know that has been the case. Sporadically, you'll hear of people being sick from perhaps monkeys or bats, in this case, caged animals that are out of their habitat. They're in a densely populated city. But this has been going on for 200 years. So, okay. This is what might have happened, according to the text, at the market in Wuhan, where the novel coronavirus is believed to have originated. So coronavirus did not exist before then, according to the text. And it originated most likely, or might possibly, at a market from bats. And the bats carried the disease and passed the disease on to humans in a densely populated market, or densely frequented market. The Chinese authorities have since permanently banned wildlife trade and consumption. Okay. Nowadays, most scientists would agree that the greater Okay, so we're moving on. And, okay. Nowadays, most scientists would agree that the greater population growth is the more we disturb the environment. So more people, more destruction to the environment. The more intensive farming becomes without adequate biosecurity. Biosecurity has been an issue for a while. If you remember, in the 50s, DDT was used as a pesticide to keep little critters from eating up the crops. And the DDT actually went into the foodstuffs that were produced by these crops. And so people started getting sick from DDT in their food, through this pesticide used to increase the harvest from agriculture. The higher the risk, the epidemics. So they're associating more intense farming with an increase in epidemics. The key anecdote currently available to us, all right, the response, is to contain the progression of these animal-transmitted diseases is the respect and preservation of the natural environment and the active protection of biodiversity. Okay. To do this effectively, it will be incumbent on us all to rethink our relationship with nature and question why we have become so alienated from it. Okay, well, that can go in quite a deep direction. In the concluding chapter, we offer specific recommendations on the form that a nature-friendly recovery might take. All right, and we'll touch upon that. My issue with this is there is no mention of laboratory environments, laboratory experiments, research that may have played a role in the development of COVID-19. No mention of ongoing government efforts, American, Chinese, wherever, whereby bioweapons are being designed and tested on animals, on other, through other experimental means. So that possibility of the virus coming from not a market where wildlife is sold, but from a laboratory where research on bioweapons was being conducted is not mentioned. And I find that a glaring omission because the premise of this book, a worldwide order in which trust toward a governing body is crucial. Any possible trust would be extremely difficult if the issue of weaponry, bioweapons, diseases as weaponized diseases is ignored. So that's an issue I have with that part of this book. And I'm going to go to the back. He mentions, Mr. Klaus Schwab mentions in the concluding chapter, we offer specific recommendations on the form that a nature-friendly recovery may make. All right, I'm going to read the last two paragraphs. I read, this is about 250 pages. I've read about 225. There is a mantra that gets repeated, and we'll discuss that further, but I want to just finish the last two paragraphs here. Among the virus's consequences, it could be proven the biggest, the most lasting, is our cause for hope. So, again, he's referring to the consequence of the virus, the silver lining being a chance for us to reset, to start again, to rethink how we govern ourselves and how we live on planet Earth. These expressions of individual hope are supported by a multitude of studies concluding that we collectively desire change. They range from a poll in the UK, United Kingdom, Great Britain, showing that a majority of people want to fundamentally alter the economy as it recovers, in contrast to 1/4 wanting it to return the way it was. The 1/4 is not surprising. Many people, rather than go out on a limb, will stay with the trunk of the tree, which is what 1/4 of these people are doing as the safest bet, just to go back to the way things were before because it's familiar. It was comfortable for these people, and why change it? International surveys find that a large majority of citizens, and I find this interesting, this is the first time in this book that he refers to people, Klaus Schwab refers to people as citizens. Citizens. Every other mention of people in this book is consumers. So there's another thing that came to my mind. People are consumers and not citizens. So if you're a consumer, then that kind of dissipates or dilutes the notion or the idea that we are citizens of a country, citizens of the world. We're consumers. So it's interesting he switches the language at the very end to citizens. Large majority of citizens around the world want the economic recovery from the corona crisis to prioritize climate change. So large majority of people on Earth want climate change prioritized and to support a green recovery. Worldwide movements demanding a better future and calling for a shift to an economic system that prioritizes our collective well-being over mere gross domestic product or GDP growth are proliferating. All right. So, okay, we'll get back to that. We are now at a crossroads. One path will take us to a better world, more inclusive, more equitable, in other words, more fair, and more respectful of Mother Nature. The other will take us to a world that resembles the one we just left behind, but worse and constantly dogged by nasty surprises. Okay. I can think of one nasty surprise. Last year when we left Afghanistan, having accomplished nothing and lost over 2,000 Americans and I don't know how many Afghan civilians. We must therefore get it right. The looming challenges could be more consequential than we have until now chosen to imagine. But our capacity to reset could also be greater than we had previously dared to hope. So, two things that are mentioned. We're pushing here a green solution in safeguarding biodiversity and reining in or changing land use so that we're not monopolizing so much growable land with agriculture. And then inclusion, which is equity or trying to involve as many people as possible in this positive new world order. So that got my curiosity up. I started looking at the Davos summits. There's been a Davos summit every year, I think, for the last 15 years. And I looked at the one from 2021, last year, and it was a Zoom affair. And Klaus Schwab introduced the summit with President Xi of China. And a couple of things were talked about over the course of 5 days. One was the threat of a population explosion. We currently have about 7 billion people on the planet, and it is envisioned that by 2030 we will have 10 billion people on the planet. And how are we going to feed these people without wrecking the environment? So here you go back into the theme of land use. Also, the push to make private enterprise more socially responsible. And in doing so, having a marriage or a working partnership between government and private business. In other words, when I say private business, generally we're talking about monopolies. We're talking about tech companies. We're talking about defense industry, people who make airplane ships, car manufacturers, even home builders. And also this idea of social justice, whereby the income inequality that has dogged many capitalist countries. In fact, it's a gap that has been growing, especially through coronavirus. If you had money, you probably did okay during the virus. If you worked, you could work from home. But if you were a lower income person who could not work from home, who did not have that type of office environment but had to go into work, or then your experience was different. If you worked in the service industry, chances are you lost your job in retail or in the food industry. And if you were involved in, let's say, education or healthcare, you worked twice as hard for the money that you were making under very stressful circumstances. So that was discussed in 2021. It was interesting. Vladimir Putin gave a speech. There were also other world leaders. I listened to the speech from Putin, not really saying too much. Again, it's talking around without details. A very generalized discussion as to working together, using technology to level the playing field, sorry for the cliche, but to achieve some type of economic equity so that we have fewer people falling through an economic safety net and living in poverty and despair. And then the 2022, which was January 17th through the 21st, again, the 5-day group of seminars was Zoomed, and the introduction was by Klaus Schwab and again President Xi. And I found that interesting because first, 2 years in a row, President Xi is the co-host with, or the presentator with Klaus Schwab, and we're talking about reducing carbon footprints. And yet in China, they're currently bringing online 40 new fossil fuel or coal-burning plants because their hydroelectric plants have become defective with construction faults. So I just find it interesting. We have this kind of kumbaya, let's get together and talk along the same narrative of being green and inclusive. When one of the people that, one of the world leaders that introduces the summit is not only not reducing their carbon footprint, but increasing it. And it rubs the wrong way, especially when the U.S. has been closing down fossil fuel plants, which have cost employment. And there hasn't really been enough trust established between the government and the public as to whether or not the energy grid will be interrupted with blackouts or power shortages because more plants are being taken offline for being dirty or fossil fuel driven. The 2022 had Janet Yellen on. Janet Yellen, interesting person. I would like to consider her probably one of the best choices from the Biden administration as far as cabinet positions. She was the Secretary of Treasury, I believe. She's Secretary of Treasury right now. And She was before, during the Obama administration, the head of the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is like a third-party institution or organization that regulates banks. She was involved with bank regulation under, as the chair of, not chair, but on the board of economic advisors under Bill Clinton in the 90s. Her main thing was to keep unemployment low. And it was, I found out through her speech during this symposium of the World Economic Forum that evidently our unemployment is below 5%. It's now 4.9%. And that the target is to bring it down below 4%. And that we should, according to her brand of economics, the brand that, the type of, what is it, Kenzonia? I forget the name. But the type of economic program that she supports, we can live with 2 to 3% inflation. It's actually 5, 6, 7% right now. And not worry about that as long as the unemployment is going down, and it has been going down. She was also a proponent of raising the debt ceiling, believing that if we increased our borrowing, that the money invested would come back to us in tax revenue from the investments, from the projects, or the would be used as seed money. So that she was in favor of the Economic Recovery Act, American Recovery Act, I believe, that pumped money into the environment, increasing unemployment compensation, or lengthening it, extending it is the word I'm looking for, giving money to businesses that had been shut. In other words, kind of a form of welfare until the economy got back on its feet, and again, a form of seed money. The trouble is, and this was the counter-argument, that if too much money is printed, it loses its value, and that feeds inflation. Number of things have fed inflation, evidently fuel, although honestly, I think in our area, fuel prices have not gone up that significantly. There's been prices in raw material that have gone up. I know Carla complains about grocery prices going up, but the limited shopping I do, when I pay the fuel bill, sure, it's up maybe $1 a gallon, or items are up 50, 60, 70 cents. And if you're on a fixed income, that hits you the hardest. But other places in the country have it worse as far as what they're paying per gallon of gasoline. California, it's like $6 for a gallon of gasoline, 5.5. They're paying more for energy. So we're actually in Vermont, given the fact we are so energy dependent due to the cold weather, it's could be a lot worse. So she was in favor of the Build Back Better program, which was still being discussed by Congress when she gave this talk a couple of weeks ago. Since then, of course, the Senate has put the kibosh on the Build Back Better program along partisan lines. I think it was like a 25 vote in the Senate. So the Build Back Better program, which was part of the Biden's administration's further stimulus and green initiative, and also inclusivity, trying to bring more people in according to the World Economic Forum plan, failed because people were afraid that we were taking on too much debt and that inflation would increase even further with the devalued currency. So, whether that's true or not, find out. I think part of the issue with the lack of support for Build Back Better was the lack of details. We had economic recovery money, $4 to $6 billion, I believe, that was spent supposedly or for COVID. And then when you looked at the bill, and this is the trouble with so many of these bills that get tossed around Congress and ultimately go before the Senate, there's a lot that's added in. And it turned out that the COVID relief package contained millions and millions of dollars of foreign aid. And foreign aid is fine in the right time, the right place, in the right box, under the right label. But to have this under the umbrella of COVID relief, I think, was dishonest and misleading. It further eroded the trust in the government to responsibly handle the COVID challenge and not put us into mindless debt by just throwing money whichever way Congress wanted it to go according to particular special interests. So I think, my opinion, that's what killed Build Back Better, was lack of trust in where the money was going, the vagueness, and also a lot of people still are not on board as to the severity of climate change. And I think part of it is the spokespeople that have come out in favor of Green New Deals and this notion of being more inclusive, which idealistically is what we all want. We don't want anybody left behind, because part of being part of the reason behind America is it's inclusive. It hasn't always been, but it doesn't mean that the original premise was faulty. It just means the premise was correct. It's just human leadership that was faulty. Anyway, Janet Yellen, both positive and negative. I disagree with her on the debt. I think we do have too much debt, and it does risk. Seed money is good, but I don't see the revenue coming in from this expenditure to offset the increased debt that we would all incur. I think the debt right now is like $10,000 per person and going up higher. Bill Gates was also there talking about land use. Interestingly enough, Bill Gates is involved in land use because he is now one of the largest owner of cattle grazing property in the United States. He's been buying up large amounts of acreage with the intent of raising cattle or raising food production, but food production that goes away from meat and other products, animals that are considered harmful to the environment. Again, that's another debate. That's another issue that still has to be vetted or still has to be discussed with the public. John Kerry was there. He's our President Biden's environmental representative. I did not listen to what he spoke about, but obviously the environment and the need for renewable energy. Also, the CEO of Moderna, which I believe is a French-based pharmaceutical company, one of the top 5 that has been producing a vaccine. So, the answers here, what everybody that I've mentioned, these world leaders, the people participating in these forums, have been pushing is blanket vaccination of the population, including children. Restrictions per the CDC, which actually, like the Federal Reserve, is not part of the government. It's a separate body that oversees and makes suggestions. I don't know how much enforcement they have. Federal Reserve has enforcement. They can actually fine banks for misconduct. But I don't know what the CDC, if it's just advisory, but they're being used as the guide for restrictions and countermeasures to the spread of COVID or its variants. A push towards more green living, electric cars, and I think this is where the disconnect really hurts. Most people that I know, myself included, are still having trouble first recognizing the exact nature of the threat. According to Klaus Schwab in The Great Reset, it's farming, and I can understand that to a degree. Also, the carbon, the exhaust gases from our cars and from energy-making plants, energy-producing plants, I should say, power plants. And also that we need to be inclusive. And my question there is, I understood this all sounds very good, but at the same time, we have issues that are just outside our door, down our block. And my opinion, and I've mentioned this in closing, I've mentioned this to a couple of people that are running for different offices here, statewide and nationwide, national office here in Vermont, that have been looking for money, congressional candidates, and you now have a couple of senatorial candidates to take the place of Senator Patrick Leahy, who retired, and Congressman Peter Welch, who now wants Patrick Leahy's seat in the Senate. And I'm sure that both of them, Peter Welch and the candidates for Congress, are on board with the agenda here in the Great Reset. But my question to them would be, well, there's going to be people left out. And I think if you go through and eventually have this one body of people that are making the decisions, will they be elected? Are we still going to have a democracy? And then I look at the voter lists for Rockingham, for example, and the last presidential election. I'd say maybe 30% of the people bothered to vote. Now, you had a choice between Trump or Biden. I can understand why some people would not bother to vote, but some people did vote, and they left both possibilities blank. But when you just have 30% of the population voting, bothering to vote in what I think was an important election, it makes you wonder, is democracy on the way out anyway? Or have people just lost faith, or they're turned off by the process, the back and forth bickering and finger pointing and grandstanding and sound bites and the media, which just kind of feeds all this negative animosity. Are we going to be losing our form of government anyway, and will it be supplanted by a kind of a table at the top of elites or expert in their subject matter that are going along with this narrative proposed in the COVID-19 reset book of green and inclusive? And if that is going to happen, what's going to happen to the people that are going to be left behind? I mean, I just wonder, are we, the people left behind, the people that have issues? How are we going to deal with drug abuse? How are we going to, or substance abuse? How are we going to deal with people that are increasingly going to be lost in this new world of artificial intelligence, whereby they don't have to think, everything is done for them? Eventually, I think we will have a worldwide minimum wage if, these leaders continue to push the narrative, so that everybody is covered. But I don't really see an incentive being established for people to do for self-betterment. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. Also, there's no mention here of the family as a basic unit of society, of support. The idea of family, traditional family, has been under scrutiny in our country as being, some have even said it's obsolete, it doesn't work anymore, and that people should not be confined to a mother-father traditional household. And my opinion, I think you're playing with fire. I think we've had generations of young boys growing up without fathers, who generally don't end well. And I think by having a reset and throwing out the baby with the bathwater, we're going to have perhaps a world where people are comfortable, but I don't think they're going to be thinking. I don't think they're going to be have that inner satisfaction of being self-reliant or being in touch with their spirit, because everything here, what I've read, is just external. The soul or the spirit of the individual is not addressed. The basic family unit as a starting point for our perception of the world is not addressed. It's basically an external only approach towards improving people's lifestyle, their emotional well-being, their physical well-being, but their spiritual well-being, I think, is being ignored here. So that's my 2 cents on the Great Reset. I think it brings up very good points. It is important to take care of people in need. I think it is important to give people equal access to assets, to make companies or corporations and governments be in partnerships more responsible for the outcomes of their projects or products, what they make. But especially now that we're dealing with more technology, where the line between what's creative and what is real has become very blurry. And so I think we're living in very interesting times. The best time to be alive, I think, is right now, because we're on the cusp of something either very good or we're going to need another reset from the reset, because we risk going into, in my opinion, possibly the wrong direction in ignoring the spirit of people and what drives them inside by just dealing with outside symptoms. So next week we will be live, and that will be on the 10th, Thursday, February 10th. So I wish you all a good evening. Thank you for tuning in. And if you have comments or questions, please tune in again next Thursday. And the numbers will be at the bottom of the screen. I hope to hear from you. So take care and God bless.